This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you for being here again after this quite long break, which may also have led to several people just opting out, but that's okay. And some others have written to me that they can't make it today, but we'll do it next time. So we'll just start, and we've, as we were already saying just now, it's clear from the text for today that we're moving into a sort of different gear, as it were, to some of the things that we looked at last term, on this sort of march to the history of, come in. This march through the history of continental. And with Hegel and Schelling, we get across into a very difficult area where you would say this idealist kind of thinking it runs very much against what I've said is some of the continuities in the history of German thought with respect to this concept of matter that has the function of pointing to the outside of thought, that which is outside of thought, that which opens thought up to something else than what it is. And in a way that's true, but in another way I think there's also a real addition to the thinking about matter that is made in idealism, certainly in Hegel and also in Schelling. And hopefully we get around to both of those today, but it might be that we just only do Hegel and then we'll do Schelling next time. We're not too fussed about that. And for me, I think reading this Hegel selection, I took the passages from the login, from the encyclopedia that are actually in this book that I pointed out already earlier, this resource book of fragments from the philosophy of history on matter. I think that for me they were very, very interesting to read, and very, very interesting to see, especially what Hegel does with the concept and how he, in a very ingenious way, gets it to perform that function of that which points outside of thought, that which is outside of thought, how he thinks about that somehow within thought itself. And I think that's an important thing, and we should look in a little bit of detail at how he does that. At the same time, I noticed that, which is always the case with idealist German idealist philosophy of nature, that although Hegel assures us all the time that Vorstellung, representation, is not the same as Vernunft, understanding, and that physical science, moves in the area of Vorstellung.
Isn't Vernunft reason?
Reason.
Verstanden. Or Verstanden, what does that mean?
I don't actually know how these terms are usually translated. Verstand is ratiocination.
Yeah, but one's the kind of analytical.
Yeah.
The one that separates.
The one that separates and that.
I think Vernunft is the higher one.
Vernunft is the one that synthesizes.
Yeah.
And so that's reason exactly. Yeah, sorry. So reason. So for the Verstand and Vernunft, then he sort of seems to say physics and natural science moves in the area of Verstand. But of course, what he says about matter is so wildly at odds with anything that modern science tells us about it, but except maybe for a few points where he shows that paradoxes in modern science, he doesn't talk about that, but you could read it in this way, that paradoxes in modern science is the wave and particle character of the electron, or also the strange fact that, I don't know anything about this, but the impossibility to determine the location of an elementary particle in a certain situation means that it is actually everywhere at all times in a realist sense, and only when the measurement is made it contracts, as it were, to a specific point in space-time. So even there, I think there are, and that's something that's very similar to one aspect of what we find here in the discussion of matter. So even there, you might say that this reminder that quantum physics gives us a lot of the time that we should not try to vorstellen what it is or how it works and what it means. We cannot with reason apprehend. We cannot imagine it. We cannot represent it, but we can perhaps do the math. So there is a form of reasoning that we can do with respect to these states of affairs which are bewildering and unimaginable. So in that sense, there may also be a parallel, and there are maybe more parallels that we can talk about. So yeah, those are some of the things that I found. But what I wanted to do before we start is just have a quick look at these two poems. I'm starting with, well, I've already said this, but
This is one film.
okay. Yeah.
This one much.
Yeah. Two poems by Rilke, and let me just explain. So it seems to me that this, as I said, this concept of matter has something to do with the outside of thought. It has something to do with change, with creativity. It's also something to do with subjectivity or with openness. And we can see there's not a continuity of thought about matter, there's not a grand narrative about the concept of matter or something, but we can see that this concept comes up, that it performs a function when thought has to be pulled outside of itself. And that we can see that in the aftermath to German idealism, which is a really sort of materialist reading of idealist themes, which starts with Marx and goes on into critical theory and even up until the present day. But we can also see it in many other places, in Nietzsche's materialism, which we will look at some point. And I feel we also saw it very clearly in Böhme, in the idea of Morgenröte, of the morning dawn. And we also saw it very clearly in Leibniz, in the idea that matter is alive, that the whole of the material world is really, these monads, is like a pond filled with fish, and it's alive everywhere. The fish come back here as a metaphor as well. So there is something about a critical role that materialism plays. It is a self-critique of thought, as it were. And I think, well, I just had to think of these poems because it seems to me that in a way that perhaps particularly German attitude, gesture of critiquing a totalitarian trait within thinking, that comes out in these poems, and at the same time it points to something that Hegel highlights very clearly, namely that the material world or matter is streben, is an urge or is a desire, or that it is a principle of movement. Even that is already said too much, that sounds too logical. It is urge, it is will, it is movement, it is very much as in Schopenhauer developed as Will und Vorstellung. The will is the site of the material. And we'll see in the discussion of Schwere that for heaviness, or is it translated as happiness in the translation, or gravity. The Schwere is the moment where matter relates to a center point, a Mittelpunkt, that is outside of itself. And he takes that as the basic, as the crux about the material, is that it is that moment, spoken about from the point of view of Vernunft, of reason, that moment in being, which has its center point, that which it strives for outside of itself, and in the movement of relating to it, the sphere of ideality or formality arises. And that idea, I think, is something that we see also in these poems. So I just wanted to look at those and highlight a few elements. We'll start with the poem from 1901, Westerwege, which is a poem about a utopian imagination. It's a poem about a world that has come into harmony with itself. So it speaks from the point of view of the desire for a world in which this outside of itself, or everything outside of itself, no longer exists. But the way it does that is through an appeal to the material reality, and not to anything else. Alles wird wieder groß sein und gewaltig, die Lande einfach und die Wasser faltig, die Bäume riesig und sehr klein, die Mauern, und in den Tälern stark und vielgestaltig, ein Volk von Hirten und von Ackerbauern. Und keine Kirche, welche Gott umklammern wie einen Flüchtling und ihn dann bejammern wie ein gefangenes und wundes Tier. Die Häuser gästlich allen Einlass klopfern und ein Gefühl von unbegrenztem Opfern in allem Handeln und in dir und mir. Kein Jenseits warten und kein Schauen nach drüben, nur Sehnsucht auch dem Tod nicht zu entweihen und dienen sich am Irdischen zu üben, um seinen Händen nicht mehr neu zu sein. So you can read the translation for yourself. Yeah? And I wanted to point, so I just wanted to show you that when we think about what we're talking about with materialism, that we can see that this is a materialist poem, but at the same time it is materialist in the typical German sense of expressing this Sehnsucht in the material itself for its own harmony, its own resolution or identity, which comes out in the word Opfern, which is not a sacrifice to a higher being or a transcendent deity, but is as it were a word that here comes to indicate how every action, every agency and every act of a person comes to function or stand within the totality that the poem speaks about. So it transcendentalizes the notion of sacrifice and makes the sacrificial really a moment within the realization of now secularly understood material world. But at the same time, it's not a reduction to a more basic or mechanical form or a reduced form of the material.
So what Nietzsche does with redemption.
Yes, I think
it
yes.
at all.
Yeah. I think in a way it is very, very closely related to that. Yes, I can see what you mean. Although here, that's true. Yeah. So that is when we come to Nietzsche's Materialism, which is a book that Sloterdijk has written a long time ago. The thinker on stage, Nietzsche's Materialism. That's what that point will come across, and we can find in Nietzsche many moments when he speaks about this kind of redemption by accepting material and also accepting death and accepting forgetfulness. Well, here
there's always shameless distinction between productivity and product as well.
Yeah.
Like a church. When God is fenced in by a church, I mean that's that's a product.
Yeah.
Kind of he uses boundless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Shannon says, don't forget the process over the product.
Yeah.
Which you can see later as that's kind of an idealist version of the notion of commoditization or fetishization. But that's in Marx it becomes the fetishismus critique. And so you can see exactly that this fencing God in is a kind of fetishization of something that is a part of productivity rather than exactly.
Although I guess in Schelling and Hegel it's kind of necessary, this bounding, this determining, limiting, it's not necessarily, a bad thing, is it? I mean, it's part of it's a moment in the process.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think the poem would deny that. The sense that we're talking here about fencing God in is a sense of is maybe not providing the limit or the grenze in the sense which you're always already beyond it, but is the attempt to close it off. Yeah. Gott umklammern, so to hold tight to, it says in German. Umklammern, to put in between brackets was to hold on tight. Like somebody wants to get away. and then knowing about it, and then knowing that he is a trapped and wounded animal. So being unable to accept the movement of life, as it were. And that makes it possible for people to relate to each other, for the hospitable to arise, which is a kind of communication or one thing being present with another. And this has to do with this sense of sacrifice and participating in totality, which has nothing to do with a hereafter or a beyond, the insides. But there is a longing to keep death sacred. So there is a that's the limit. There is an appreciation of the finitude of existence. But this process is this Sehnsucht, the poem seems to suggest, is longing to keep death sacred, works out in practice, in service to the earth, to no longer be new to its hands, to what the earthly creates. And that attitude is one that makes everything great and tremendous again. And so this poem is maybe written from a point of view where a religious experience of the world has become stale and has become formalized and idealized. And it's opened up in a, I think, prototypical for this German tradition, sort of looking at material sense.
Well, I mean, okay, I know it's still easy to do, it's just rather like a unhelpful challenge, the whole premise of reading this one. I just don't see what the particular benefit is, or interpretive gain, or point of making sense of the poem in terms of matter or materialism. Just in virtue of resisting kind of moves towards transcendence and otherworldliness, that doesn't then seem to equate to materialism. And the poem seems to be the same. It rings lots of bells, or romanticism in general, romantic desire to re-enchant the world.
Yeah.
The world clearly features very significantly, the clause about the earthly, the worldly. And if you want to, you can also make sense of the world as material. It doesn't seem to be any part of what this poem is wanting to suggest. The object is much more generally characterised, I thought, as nature rather than matter. And of course, then getting to Hegel and Schelling, then the issue of the relation to those two terms is significant. And if anything, the poem seems to be very much associated with these use of these religiously inflected terms like sacrifice and service and so forth. It is inviting us to conceive of a re-enchanted world, a re-enchanted relationship to the world, one which actually is, well, spiritual. I mean, that seems to be that kind of general romantic tenor. So the one thing is talking about it as materialistic doesn't seem to sit well, from what I think, with that kind of romantic spiritualism. So I don't get in that sense. I don't get the particular point of seeing this as materialistic, except in the sense that it's not promoting a kind of a transcendental kind of conception of our relationship to the world. So that then leaves the whole conception of what the world is fairly open. I mean, insofar as the world is invoked in the opening stanza, it's land. So the land are surely are kind of like regions, aren't they? They're the sense of habited space rather than kind of the material world. And this is a land which is cultivated, tended, herded, and so forth, with walls on it, even if they are low and so forth. So it's a humanised world.
Yeah, that's what it's of course. Yeah.
So again, the material doesn't kind of seem to figure that strongly. It's kind of it's a humanised world, humanised, naturalised world. And all those things are material too. But again, that doesn't seem to be what the poem is inviting us to consider. I would thought.
But of course, I mean, you know, it only can go so far illustrating philosophy with help of a poem. You know, those are different things. But if we think of the So if we think of Hegel, I think it says a lot in these few pages that we have read, but it seems to be the idea that just as that thought has got something that is outside of itself, and that is the material, that is the movement from ideality to reality, and at the same time the material has to be understood as that which has its center point outside of itself. And that is a solution to a lot of the problems about extension and perception that Hegel tries to work with in order to solve these problems. So there is something about, from the point of view of reason, seeing the material and the thought, or the ideal, as moments in a process that can only be understood as not consisting in concrete moments, which can be distinct from each other, which mutually penetrate each other. And I think that helps us to understand what the material world is for us. Now, if you look at the poem and you add one layer to what you have just said, and you see that this is actually a poem, which itself is a creation, which itself is somebody writing something, speaking something, that is a material process, and we're reading it, we enact it again. So the poem itself, the reality of the poem itself, is the opening within matter that points toward that center point outside of it. The poetical act itself becomes, in this poem, becomes material, or points us to matter in that sense. It becomes, it is not just somebody writing about a feeling, or writing about an idea, or writing about a perception. The text itself becomes a part of that material process, understood in that way, and it brings it to itself, like Schelling says, in the human nature opens its eyes and sees itself. And I think that is a real materialist in the way I want to understand that word.
Well, there is a suggestion in the first stanza that what he's talking about is not simply some kind of religious awakening, that it's actually it can't happen without some kind of, I mean, it's a ridiculous idea, but nevertheless it is a material grounding. It can't happen without, a return to a basically agricultural economy.
Yeah, I mean, that's there too.
Unless we confine ourselves to herding and tilling soil, then we can't do this. We can't have this organic community.
No, that's true. Yeah, that's there too. I mean, that's something I would not maybe subscribe to myself so much. I don't like farming culture that much. But okay, give or take that. But it's not just that has to happen. It's also that we have to read this poem. We have to understand that this is what is the striving in material reality is for this, and it has to be brought out to itself for it to become effective, as it were. So because all these shepherds and tillers of the soil have got to understand that this is what they're doing, otherwise it's not just about going back. And so the poet in a way gives voice to the Sehnsucht, that's also a word that Hegel uses, that lies in the material. And that is the material, precisely as that which has its point of, its center of gravity outside of itself. Now he says that the material object that has a center of gravity within itself that's Vorstellung. But the material object that's attracted and repelled, is that which has its center of gravity outside of itself. And that's why matter becomes, he says, it's on the road to subjectivity. And I think what I tried to say was this is a way of giving some flesh, putting some flesh on the bones of that idea, by seeing that in the poem, it is almost as if the world's desire expresses itself, comes to itself, And of course, it does it in the form of an agricultural idyll. It's a kind of a pastoral motif. But you might even surmise that the pastoral motif is as it were just a conceit to get it going, to get the idea going. And so, what do you think, or is that not what you were trying to say?
Well, I do think there's a lot of Heidegger in Rilke.
Yeah. Or maybe the other way around. Yeah.
Well, one of the Giulino elegies, there's a line to the effect about being, homeless in this, described world. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it is a revolt against a certain kind of understanding of materialism.
Yeah.
Or you might want to call it subsumption instead. Things being loosely submitted to quantity and measure and calculation and so on.
Yeah, that's right, and it's also that's right. And so in that sense, you might also say this is a very anti-modern poem, in a way. You could, but that's right, and it's important to say that I didn't want to read it in that way. I wanted to suggest that we might even say that particular strand in German thought, which comes to its apotheosis in Heidegger, that is in a way also a skewed version of this materialist sentiment, which maybe does not recognize itself fully for what it is, in Heidegger at least, and has to make it into something metaphysical, precisely, which would explain why this philosophy gets this waterhead on top of it, over its body. So you see what I mean? You could develop materialist. We've just begun, but you could develop a proper materialist understanding of the history of German thought, in which Heidegger would appear as an effect rather than as a cause of something. And it would then be, and so you could then save this poem by saying you don't have to read it in a Heideggerian way. There are these elements in it, but actually you can read it in an enlightened materialist Schellingian sense, as it were. Yeah, and then it becomes, and maybe let's go to the other one, then we start Hegel. It becomes this point of gravity outside of itself becomes also very clear in the 20th sonnet to Orpheus, and the second part of these sonnets, where Rilke talks about the incommunicable distances between entities, and says that nowhere is the circle closed, which is a very dramatic formulation of Hegel's main point with respect to the material. But in language, there is a possibility of coming together, perhaps, but even that is something that lies outside of our horizon. And it's something that we learn in our world more even than in the natural world. Zwischen den Sternen wie weit, und doch wie vieles noch weiter, was man am hiesigen merkt. Einer zum Beispiel ein Kind und ein Nächster, ein Zweiter, oh wie unfasslich entfernt. Schicksal, es misst uns vielleicht mit der seienden Spanne, dass es uns fremd erscheint. Denk, wie viel Spannen allein vom Mädchen zum Manne, wenn es ihn meidet und meint. Puts him off, actually, it's not puts him off, it's ignores him or alles ist weit und nirgends schließt sich der Kreis. Sie in der Schüssel, auf heiser bereitetem Tische, seltsam der Fische Gesicht. Fische sind stumm, meinte man einmal, wer weiß. Aber ist nicht am Ende ein Ort, wo man das, was der Fischesprache wäre, ohne sie spricht. pretty much. So fish, the fish lays on the table, and its face is strange. It's as strange as the faces of other people for us. It's as distant as the distance between the stars, or even further than that. And the fish is speechless. But is it really speechless, the poet asks? Isn't there at last a place in which one speaks the fish's language without the fish? Is nicht am Ende ein Ort? Is there not in the end at last a place? Wo man das, was der Fischesprache wäre, where one, that which would be the language of the fish, where one speaks that without them. And again, I think that points to the moment where the circle closes in the language of the poem. And that was a totally utopian moment. That's something that is not, that's not here, but is here precisely as the desire that is articulated in language in the poem. Again, the poem becomes a part of the real world, as it were, of the process of realization itself. And something becomes clear there, or is expressed there with respect to what this distance is. This distance between beings, which in the moment it is identified, is on the way to being overcome, although there is no, that cannot be grasped from within the entities themselves. Why are the fish here on the table? Well, that's a metaphor, of course, but you might say the fish is in that sense interesting from the point of view of our discussion of matter, in that it is an animal that lives in a different medium. So this poem talks about crossing media, going from one medium into another. And when the fish is on the table, when the fish is out of the water, it has to die, just as we would have to die when we were submerged in the water. There is an impossibility of, I've been thinking a lot about fishing in the last few months, there's an impossibility of encountering the fish in the sea, because we do not share the same medium. The only moment where we come together is in the moment where the fish is caught, where the line spans, and that line is precisely the spanne between one entity and another. But it's only there in the moment, and then something has to happen. Either you put it out to the water and the fish dies, or you let it go back, or you can't hang on to it, as it were. That's one of the meditative uses of fishing, that it teaches you how to live in the world, because from this point of view, because this is something that pervades reality itself.
But presumably, I mean, Orpheus himself would represent a kind of mythical, anticipation of that.
A mythical
because I mean, all of the animals responded to Orpheus's lyre,
Exactly.
I don't think any birds and beasts are mentioned, but presumably had any passing fishmen around, they had also responded to
Yeah, they would have also responded, and he went fishing down in Hades.
Yeah.
But then did the same thing. He couldn't hang on to it. Yeah. And so, but what is that that he couldn't hang on to it? What is that? It is the movement that Hegel speaks about. It is the movement and the outside of itself of the material, which is just the same as the outside of itself of thought, which the other way around. And that's where, yeah, exactly. That's really, so Orpheus is a real key person here. That is where the utopian becomes relevant as a philosophical notion. Because that is, from Bloch's point of view, you would say, this is what Hegel in the end closes off. Because he also cannot stand it. That's what idealism as a philosophical attitude, if you can say it like that, closes off, because it cannot stand it. And that's what the materialism, the modern world has to keep open. And then the whole view of philosophy is how it enters into the world, how it changes. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Twitch upon a thread in Brighton Revisited. So that's one of the chapter headings, isn't it? But there it's completely re-theologized. There's this, you can't, Sebastian, the protagonist cannot go as far as he wants into the corners of the earth, to the corners of all the earth. His sister said, the younger sister says, but twitching on the thread can bring him back. But I can't. Yeah, so I think that's right, exactly. So yes, thanks very much for that, Mark. So Orpheus is a materialist, a hero, as it were. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the last bit, I think it may accept spiritual interpretation as well on Mead's account. But you find that in Benjamin. He suggests that we speaks for, doesn't he, Mead? That we speak for object or things in the world.
Yeah.
But there is an original language that God created the world with. And that comes to us, and that language was creative in the first instant when God created the world. But with the fall, it's lost its power. But we here, we redeem the world by speaking for other things.
This refers very much to the language of the fish. It says the fish speaks has its own tongue, rather than it being something which speaks some original language. So it doesn't seem quite the same. Except that as far as Greek poetic language, it has the ability to speak fish's language, yes. But that's without that kind of theological story which you had in Benjamin, I suppose.
It's a very old theological idea that we speak on behalf of the world, of things. But you don't have to take it, you don't have to take it in a spiritual sense, in a traditional way of thinking about what a spiritual sense is, but it is, of course, the spirit precisely as far as actually the German text stopped probably before the end of the logics paragraph, but Mead copied it anyway. The final paragraph there, he talks about the mind-body problem, as it were, and shows that we should not, also from his analysis, should not think about mind and body as two substances, and that so spirit and matter should not be thought of as two substances, but as two moments in the process of realization. Well, let's look at the text and let's see how some of these reviews fit into that.
Can I just ask, any particular reason for doing Hegel before Schelling?
Not really. Do you think we should do Schelling first? No, I just there's no real reason for doing that. Do you think we benefit more from Schelling and discussing Schelling? I'm happy to if you want to do that. But
I don't want to be responsible for changing the.
No, I don't think it's a big reason.
Set to do something one way or another.
What were your reasons for saying this?
Just chronology. I suppose. That's.
Yeah. I suppose I tend to think that Schelling's, maybe it's just my prejudice, I tend to think that Schelling's philosophy, what Schelling has to say about this has more resonances than what Hegel has to say about it. But maybe that's not entirely true. Shall we start with Hegel? Or what do you think?
Maybe, I can see the point going Hegel Schelling in this respect, given the texts which you've chosen. Hegel's focusing much more on matter in physical sense, whereas the Schelling texts are looking at the philosophy of nature more generally, and so that there is a greater, broader scope there. So it's, to that extent, it seems to follow.
It seems to me that what Hegel does with the concept of matter is he not just tries to, but he has to give it a place, and he comes up with a very I can't claim to fully understand everything about it, but a very advanced way of thinking about it, which opens up the perspective of and repeats the perspective of matter as alive. And I think that is something that in Schelling's philosophy of nature comes back with a lot more force. So maybe that historically it's not exactly chronological, but in Hegel, the passages I've chosen end up with Hegel with an idea of matter as the movement of life itself. And I think in that sense it is.
So, yeah, but that's not, I think it's unfair to suggest that. It may be true, but it's for other reasons. I think it's unfair to suggest that because Schelling is more sophisticated philosopher than Hegel is. If you selected alongside the Hegel text, the parallel text in Schelling's work, where he's also explicitly thematizing matter, would again find that Schelling describing matter as leading to something else in the way Hegel is.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's just that Schelling is much more into these kind of programmatic sort of text on here is my grand plan.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. But yeah, okay. Well, okay. So it is a prejudice on my part to think that in this respect, Schelling is the real end of German materialism and not Hegel. Yeah. Okay, well, let's do Hegel first. And I think I've thought long about how to talk about this text because it's really very difficult. For me, it's very difficult. I think we really have to read it actually. How do we all with the German? You don't read the German, do you? No. Okay. So shall we start with, we'll do it in English then. The constitution of the thing out of matters, that's plural. So transition of property into a matter or into a self-subsistent stuff is a familiar transition performed on sensible matter by chemistry when it seeks to represent the properties of color, smell, etc. as luminous matter, coloring matter, odorific matter, sour, bitter matter, and so on. Or when it simply assumes others, like calorific matter, electrical magnetic matter, in the conviction that it has thereby gotten hold of properties as they truly are. Equally current is the saying that things consist of various matters or stuffs. One is careful about calling these matters or stuffs things, even though one will readily admit that, for example, a pigment is a thing. But I do not know whether luminous matter, for instance, or calorific matter, or electrical matter, etc., are called things. The distinction is made between the things and their components, without any exact statements as to whether these components also and to what extent are things, or perhaps just half things, but they are at least concrete in general. So, we tend to think of a thing. Hegel starts here by saying we tend to think of a thing as having properties, and these properties can somehow be relegated to a self-subsistent stuff or matter, as it's called. And then he gives quite weird examples of what this matter is. So if we ask what is the matter or redness of the cup, then somebody might say it's a pigment, or it's paint, or something like that. And so the same for every other property about it. If we think of the wine, we have the redness of the wine, where we would say maybe that is a pigment, and we have the alcoholic nature of the wine, where we would say that is alcoholic substance, maybe the alcohol in the wine. And so we say that things consist of various matters or stuffs. But then the question arises, are these matters or stuffs themselves also things? And there, of course, it becomes a little bit less clear. In the case of alcohol, you can say, yeah, alcohol is a substance itself. You could extract it from the wine and you could pour it in a cup and you could have it. with respect to the color, it is already much more difficult. You could say whether it's a pigment. You could maybe isolate the pigment, but in the case of wine, it's perhaps maybe not even a pigment that makes it red. It's rather the particular combination of all the elements within it that makes it red. Oh, hi.
Sorry.
Come in. And so what we're talking here about, and so that is what we call matter in one sense, that which things exist, are composed of. But how does that work? Are they things in themselves, or are they some sort of strange half thing? So the question here arises, what is the nature of the thing understood as a singular thing, as this thing here, and on the other hand, understanding the way that unity is composed out of different elements, matters, stuffs that exist both outside of each other. The redness is not the taste, or the pigment is not the alcohol, but at the same time are also together. And I think what Hegel is thinking about is how to understand this aspect of the material world, as of a thing, as he calls it, that it is both parts outside of parts, that's an old scholastic idea, matter as partes extra partes, it's both parts out of parts, and it is a togetherness. And the key word that he uses for that is, I don't know how it's been translated, auch. Also, yeah. So that is, the material is the realm of also. So the wine is red, but it's also alcoholic. But the redness is not alcoholic, and the alcohol is not red. But still the wine is red and also alcoholic. I think we have a bit more of English thing, don't you? The thing at the end of that paragraph B, which is on page 3 of the text that we prepared, in the first box at the end. The thing is this is just a merely quantitative connection, a mere collection there also. The thing consists of some quantum or other of a matter, also of the quantum of another, and also of yet another. This combination of not having any combination alone constitutes the thing. So the thing is Äußerlichkeit, it's externality. And later on that will become appearance. And this thing is something that in the vernünftige analysis of it dissolves. So read the first paragraph of 1221C on page 1, or page 3 of the handout. This thing, in the manner it has determined itself as the mere quantitative combination of free matters, is the absolutely alterable. Its alteration consists in one or more matters being dropped from the collection, or being added to this also, or in a rearrangement of the matter's respective quantitative ratio. The coming to be and the passing away of this thing is the external dissolution of such an external bond, or the binding of such for which it is indifferent whether they are bound or not. The stuffs circulate concrete existence.
Delete concrete existence.
Yeah, exactly. The stuffs circulate unchecked in or out of this thing, and the thing itself is absolute porosity, without measure or form of its own. Es ist selbst die absolute Porosität, ohne eigenes Maß qua Form. And therefore, so the thing in the absolute determinateness through which it is this is the absolutely dissoluble thing. So, the absolute determinateness through which something is a this it is this rather than that, but it is also, it is here and now rather than somewhere else or at some other place. This links us to the discussion of space and time that we're going to do in a minute. But it is this identifiability in space and time that gives it the nature of being an absolutely dissoluble thing. And that already points to an abstraction, or a form of abstract reasoning that Hegel will point to in a little while, where he says the distinction between space and time on one hand and the matter that fills it on the other is abstract. That's an abstraction. So the Newtonian gives us a discussion, a short discussion of Newton. The Newtonian view is an abstraction. Now, this dissolution is an external process of being determined, just like the being of the thing. But its dissolution and the externality of its being is the essential of this thing, is what is essential about this thing. The thing is only the also. It consists only of this externality. But it consists also of its matters, and not just the abstract this as such, but the this thing whole is the dissolution of itself. For the thing is determined as an external collection of self-subsisting matters. Such matters are not things, they are not things, they lack negative self-subsistence. In other words, they lack thisness. And that's one point where the way we normally think about the constitution of a material object is very different from what Hegel is saying here. If we normally think about the wine and its redness and the alcohol in it, then we would say the alcohol is a chemical substance, and the chemical substance is in principle just as much a thing as the wine itself, wouldn't we? It might not apply maybe not for the color, I'm not so sure about that, but as a property. But we would say, even there, we would probably, in a physicalist explanation, we would say the redness does not end in here, in the wine itself. The redness is in effect the relation between the light and the substance, particularly of the substance and the perceiver. So there we would say the redness is not a stuff, although even there, you would say at one point they were talking about parcels of energy. We're talking about waves of a certain wavelength, and they also are. We don't really know what they are. We can't probably imagine that, how they relate to their own space and time. But at the same time, they are not ontologically of a fundamentally different order than the conglomerate itself. Whereas Hegel seems to be saying that this is actually something very different. They lack negative self-subsistence, which is they are not this.
But could you not argue that in a sense, Hegel is operating, the pre-kind of scientific level? So rather than talking about chemical substances, he's talking about the assignation of properties and the way in which, as soon as one starts talking about immediate sense certainty, that one's inevitably committed to some kind of idealism and the kind of naive, or maybe what he will call disingenuous empiricism, just doesn't make any sense.
We are committed to a kind of almost like phenomenological attitude, because even our constructions of the scientific explanation happen only on the basis of that, genetically. We don't escape we only know that water is H2O because first we have learned what water is, and that happens in that mode. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. But it seems to me that still leaves open. Yeah, somehow I don't find that a really satisfactory answer to the question of the problematic relationship between the scientific explanation and what he is talking about, because it does all have very strong ontological or metaphysical claims.
So in other words, you're saying that the kind of donkey science and people, actually matters.
Yeah, and it is, yeah, exactly. I think it. But I would say I know that you can argue that it doesn't in that sense, but to me it is. It seems to me that it's very difficult to maintain a real proper distinction between these two levels. In the end, I don't think that is going to work. Although you have to realize that what he's talking about here is something quite different from what the scientist is talking about. But the question how these two things are related cannot be as easily answered as Hegel seems to think it can, by just making a distinction between Verstand and Vernunft. And he does do that in his radical act.
Sorry, which two levels are you thinking of here now? Or the two levels that are at play?
I'm thinking of the explanation of the explanation of the constitution of the material object out of things that are themselves not material objects, on one hand, which is the Hegelian explanation here, and then the explanation of the constitution out of material object out of things that are themselves also material objects.
Was it
Scientific explanation.
I don't think that either of those are at play here. I mean, what Hegel is talking about is a version of contemporary science to him. That's all the stuff about matters and stuffs is part of the scientific language of his day. So that's why in the opening paragraph it's always, one calls these things this, that and the other, equally current is this way of talking about these things. So he's evoking an existing scientific practice. The term material object doesn't figure here at all. So that seems to be a...
he calls it ding.
Thing. So it's a thing, and the position he's characterising is that which takes the thing to be made up of matter. The immediate preceding section in this chapter of the logic deals with the thing and its properties. And the thing, unsurprisingly, is construed in it makes it clear in a Kantian sense, the thing in itself. Perhaps more accurately, given the relationship to properties, it's a kind of Lockean substrate which holds properties together. So that's supposed to give the thing there the kind of determining role in constituting thingness in that in which properties inhere, which determines those properties, but in virtue of the thing as such being a thing in itself, there's something to be said about it. So that's why it disintegrates into the thing made up of matters. So this is the extent to which the properties acquire matters, acquire independence of a sort, become free, as he says, free matters. What's being considered is not a material object, but a way of construing thingness as composed of matters. And that clearly isn't going to work because the thing has yet even further lost its kind of cohesive, determining efficacy as with the thing and its properties. And so as he describes, dissolves altogether. It's getting these kind of matters kind of blurring and blending into one another. So there's a loss of thinking altogether, and thereby it seems a loss of that basic two-level ontology, which is at play in this part of the logic between essence and appearance. So everything then becomes, it seems, appearance.
That's right. And that's also what he says.
Yeah.
So at the level of the thing, everything is appearance, and that's another way of saying, oh, this is a phenomenological account of our experience of the material world as consisting of things. And what he...
Well, for things seems to have been lost as a result, isn't it? That's the thing. But that's the
thing.
consequence.
Things are lost because they become a moment within the process of subjectivity coming to itself. And that's difficult. I find that a difficult thing. You cannot. That seems to be tied up to the idea that Hegel's philosophy is not just a reconstruction of how we relate to the world, but it's actually has a very strong metaphysical claim about what this subject is, that this substance is that becomes subject. The dissolution of the thing also means the dissolution of the individual person at one point. It only makes sense if you buy so the analysis of the thing, this particular thing, only makes sense if you buy the whole package. Because exactly as you say, the dissolution of the thing, what is that in this text? It is showing that what we call thinghood is a moment in a process that is something else itself. But it is the moment in which things, but substrates, matters, are outside of each other because they are outside of themselves, outside of each other and existing at the same time as each other, but in a mere sense of also, not in the sense that they are dialectically related to each other. In a mere sense of also, the wine is red and is also cold, but it's not the redness.
It's still verstand.
It's not the redness that is cold, it's not the coldness that is red, as it would later be if Vernunftigerweise in let's say, to say that I am the glass of wine, I am the wine and the wine is me. We interpenetrate each other in a sense that cannot be understood for Verstand, that can only be understood for Vernunft. But that is not what happens in the thing itself. So insofar as the thing has an existence, insofar as the material real exists, yes, it is an existence of parts outside of parts. And that is precisely, that is itself the paradox. Because partes extra partes, the thing is parts outside of parts, means that these parts in a way do not form a whole. And that's what he says, you can mix it up in any sort of way. And that is the dissolution of, there is no unity. Because the unity has to be an interpenetration of moments, and we can only say that thingness itself as this externality of matters is itself a moment, is itself indeed part, in a unified way, part of the whole. But that is something that's the process of realization, that is what Vernunft says. So you must interrupt me because I'm just as much trying to figure out what it means as you do. Okay, maybe you want. There is a strange sentence in 112c. Third paragraph. In the subsistence of the one matter, therefore, the other matter does not subsist, and it also no less subsists in it. And so with all these diverse matters in respect to each other. The redness does not exist in alcohol, and alcohol does not exist in the redness. Since it is thus, in the same respect as the one matter subsists, that the other subsists also, It's a mere alsoness. And this one subsistence of both is the puncticity, or the negative unity of the thing. The two interpenetrate absolutely. And since the thing is at the same time only the also of the matters, and these are reflected into their determinateness, they are indifferent to one another, and in interpenetrating they do not touch. The matters are therefore essentially porous, so that the one subsists in the pores or in the non-subsistence of the others. But these others are themselves porous. In their pores or their non-subsistence, the first and also all the rest subsist. Their subsistence is at the same time their sublatedness and the subsistence of others, and this subsistence of the others is just as much their sublatedness and the subsisting of the first and equally so of all the others. Yeah.
That makes sense. So
Explain that.
Well, it's in the absence of any genuinely determining essence, such as the thing might putatively constitute, when you just think of the thing as a collection of matters, it's not simply the case that it's matter A, then matter B, then matter C. You have to think of them somehow as combined, but you've got no way of doing that. So you have to think of one as being sort of as where one is having penetrated the other, but then the other is having penetrated the first. And so it's this contradictory way of trying to think them both as like a sequence of matters, but also as genuinely constituting the thing which they manifest themselves to be.
So
The basic problem is you can't think of the identity of the difference of the matters, because there's nothing to generate that identity. So you end up thinking of them in these inconsistent ways, as either just sequentially compounded or as porously interpenetrating.
yeah, so the way I can make sense of it is to say wherever the wine is not alcoholic, there it can be red.
Yes.
And where it's not red, it can be alcoholic.
But also, you think that's the also, but then you also have to think of it being at the same time.
But it is still at the same time.
Where it is alcoholic also being red.
The wine is
So you have to think of matters all being different, but also identical.
yeah, but not, that's right, not as interpenetrating in a dialectical sense.
No, just simply there's a daft way of porosity.
It is daft way of porosity,
Yeah.
where one is, the other cannot be, but still it has, the other has to be in the pores of the other one.
As if you take one to be,
Yeah.
you're innocently taking one to be primary, and so you can as well hold within it the others, but that's just already to institute a two-level ontology where one becomes primary, whereas you think of them all as being at the same ontological level.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to reverse and think of the ratio of the way around.
Exactly. The thing is therefore, he says that the self-contradictory mediation of independent self-subsistence through its opposite, that is to say through its negation, or of one self-subsisting matter through the subsisting and non-subsisting of another. In this thing, concrete existence has attained its completion, namely that it is at once being that exists in itself, or independent subsistence, and unessential concrete existence. The truth of concrete existence is thus this, that it has its in itself in unessentiality, or that it subsists in another, indeed in the absolute other, or that it has its own nothingness for substrate. It is therefore appearance, because the truth of concrete existence is that it has its in itself, in unessentiality, or that it subsists in another. That other is now not the relation between the matters that make up the thing, but is the one for whom the thing appears. Seems to me. That's the one for whom the thing appears. So that's the punctuality of the thingness, is the one for whom the thing appears. And that's why it is appearance, or it is moment. And that is, again, the point of gravity, as it were, outside of itself, of the material. It is one, to go on into the remark to this paragraph, Anmerkung, it is one of the commonest assumptions of ordinary thinking that a thing consists of many self-subsisting matters. On the one hand, the thing is treated as having properties, the thing is their substance. That's the old Aristotelians. But on the other hand, these different determinations are regarded as matters and their subsistence is not the thing. On the contrary, the converse is the case. It is the thing rather that consists of them and is itself only their external bond and quantitative limit. Both the properties and the matter are the same content determinations, except that in the former case these determinations are moments reflected into their negative unity.
Well, that's good. Not really an answer now, is it?
Which is a phrase distinct from them, the thinghood, whereas in the latter case they are a variety of self-subsistent matters, each reflected into its own self-unity. These matters are now further determined as independent subsistence, but they are also together in a thing. This thing has the two determinations, first of being a this, and second of being an also. The also is represented in external intuition, spatial extension. That's what we tend to think of when we imagine porosity as a spatial thing. The this, the negative unity, is instead the puncticity of the thing. The matters are together in this puncticity, and their also, or their extension, is everywhere this puncticity, it's this one. For the also as thinghood is essentially determined also as a negative unity. Therefore, when one of these matters is in that one and same point the other is, the thing does not have its color in one place, its aroma in another, its heat in the third, and so forth. But at the point where it is warm, there it is also colored, sour, electric, and so forth. Now, because these stuffs are not outside one another, but are in one this, they are assumed as porous, so that one stuff concretely exists in the interstices of another, but the one that occupies the interstices of the other is itself porous. Conversely, therefore the other concretely exists in its pores. And this applies not just to the second stuff, but to the third and so forth, all porous. Yeah? Okay. That's clear. Or not? Yeah. And that is Erscheinen. Yeah. Now we move to from that we have to move to the movement, matter as movement, and matter. So this is the Verstandesbetrachtung. This is what matter looks like for the Verstand. But then we can also look at it from the point of view of Vernunft, and that's where this moment as well, what I wanted to talk about is this point of Schweren plays such an important role. And we are going to do that. Yeah, paragraph 262. That's the second text, isn't it? That you made. 262.
Before we get there, but I think as we referred to this already, the last paragraph of the remark in the logic text, he makes the interesting point about the application of the thing-matter model to the soul, the spirit.
Yeah, that's
and that very much, I think the first time I read this, part of things in Greek time, resonates very much with Lukács's account of the reification of the mind in a history and class consciousness. It's if Hegel is already thinking about that kind of pseudoscientific sort of way of compartmentalising the mind, soul.
I thought it was remarkable, yeah, that paragraph. I'm glad you put it in there. Let's have a quick look at it then. At paragraph 4, huh?
Yeah.
Of the remark.
Yeah.
We find in the spiritual realm a situation similar to that of these matters, in the conception of forces or faculties of the soul, which are also conceived of as the warmness and the form. Spirit is a this, the negative unity, in which its determinations interpenetrate in a much more profound sense, but represented as soul, it is commonly taken as a thing. Just as the human being in general is made to consist of soul and body, each of which is taken as something subsisting on its own. So also the soul is made to consist of so-called soul forces, just as the wine is alcoholic and red and more, each of which has a self-subsistence of its own, or is an activity with direct effects specifically its own. The assumption is that the understanding operates on its own here, the imagination there, that one can cultivate the understanding, the memory, etc. each for itself, leaving the others aside for the time being until perhaps their turn comes up or perhaps not. This is this arbitrariness of combination and dissolution that we mentioned in respect to materialism.
There's also a sense that you ought to be doing this. You ought to be cultivating some of your mental faculties in a manner to make yourself more functional for
so you can improve it and it becomes the subject of technological intervention or practicing it. Although in fact, since they are transposed into a materially simple soul thing, which is simple is immediately immaterial, are not portrayed as particular matters as forces, they are nevertheless equally assumed to be indifferent to one another, just like those matters. And that's an abstract way of thinking. Yeah. See next time. Yeah. That's an abstract way of thinking. But sparing the contradiction that the thing is, which dissolves itself and passes over into appearance. Rather, it is already within it the contradiction that has returned to its absolute unity, namely into the concept. The differences are no longer to be thought of in it as self-subsistent, but only as particular moments in the subject, simple individuality. That's exactly what later on, where we're getting to, say about the relation between matter and mind, or matter and spirit. I think what he's saying with this discussion of Schwere and having the central point, its Mittelpunkt outside of itself, is precisely that is the relation between matter and mind. That's the way to think about the relation between this mind and body problem. So matter is striving to become its formal, to put it in technical terms, its formal totality. It strives to become its formal totality, and that is spirit. That seems to me to be the upshot, and that's quite a radical, I don't know if I'm correct in this, but that would bring Hegel very, very closely into the proximity of Bloch. Because that is precisely how Bloch understands the material, speculative materialism. So matter tries to become its formal totality. And it can only do that by inventing the concept, as it were, because it is only in the concept that this partes extra partes can be resolved, and in which the thing as appearance can be a moment in the process of the subject coming to itself. So that's a very kind of spectacular way of looking at the relation between matter and spirit, and even one that in this little sentence goes maybe against the common läufige Darstellungen of Hegel's idealism, where the spirit we tend to think of it, if we make a caricature of Hegel, we tend to think of the spirit as this self-subsisting thing that somehow externalizes itself into the material world, and we can never understand how, what he says here himself as well, how this transition from ideality to reality can occur. But the transition from ideality to reality is something that is a reflection of the transition from reality to ideality, which is itself just as much that's where Hegel brings that, is itself just as much a necessary, logically necessary thing for Hegel. But in the order of the argument, the movement from reality to ideality precedes, in that sense, the reflection of it, the movement from ideality to reality in the operation of reason. Do you agree with that means or not? Or do you not understand?
There's a lot to take on.
Well, the most important point is that it seems to be the case that in this paragraph, and we see it later on in the second bit, we see it with respect to gravity, that we get the idea that the other of matter is spirit, and that spirit has to be understood as a movement towards a form of totality, which here is called absolute unity. So look at 262b, if we can go to that down there. I think it's
I was a bit confused by this selection because it's clear in the logic text he was talking about matters in a very specific sense of stuffs, the kind we're considering just now. But here he is talking about matter in a much more basic sense of that which fills space and time. The object of Newtonian science. So it seems a little bit of a jump from one discussion to the other, in a way backwards really, because clearly what he was talking about in the nature philosophy text is much more primordial conception of matter than that involved in matters, which is so it's interesting to know how we're going to sort of segue to harmonise our discussion of the two texts, given that it's got quite distinct senses of matter involved in both.
Yes, it's got quite a sense of matter involved, but it seems to me that they come together in this notion of this thing. So in the relation between matter and space and time. Well, let's look, okay, I see what you mean. Let's look at 262. Through the moment of its negativity, of its abstract separation into parts, but that's the same as matter in the first text. Matter holds itself asunder in opposition to its self-identity. This is the repulsion of matter. This is the pure also. This is just the other, the fact that matter is always something else. Huh?
No, it's always matter.
Yeah, it's always matter, but matter is matters. Yeah? It's abstract separation into parts. Matter holds itself asunder in opposition to its self-identity. Yes, it's always matter. Die Materie hält sich gegen ihre Identität mit sich durch das Moment ihrer Negativität, ihrer abstrakten Vereinzelung auseinander. Die Repulsion der Materie. Matter is always Vereinzelung. You cannot have one matter. It is the nature of matter that it is always this matter and that matter and this matter and that matter. And it's partes, extra partes. It's always more. It's always a plurality, and therefore it is repulsion, because this cannot come together.
That's the other way around. Because it's repulsion, it's plural. It's a sense that there's a primordial force of self-externalization into and through space.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
And in fact,
but it's a logical point. It's for him. It's a logical point. It says that which is not thought is plurality. I think. It's not a primordial. It's not a speculation about primordial force in nature. It is a logical. It's almost a logical point. That which is matter as not thought must be that which holds its identity with itself against itself, and therefore appears in first instance as abstract individualization. That's how I would read it, and I would say that this is pretty much the same point as the one that Hegel's arch enemy Schopenhauer makes when he speaks about the individualization of the will. Schopenhauer makes the same point. That's what time and space come about, and Schopenhauer insisted, because the will must individualize itself in order to be itself. There must be a battle of wills against wills, otherwise there is no will. And that's a very important point. So, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it seems to me that it's presented as a rational argument. Ebenso wesentlich ist, but since these different parts are one and the same, matter is no less essentially the negative unity of this sundered being for self, and is therefore continuous. This is its attraction. Matter is inseparably both, and is the negative unity of these two moments. Singularity. Yeah, that's how you translate answer of individual singularity. But the singularity is still distinguished from the immediate asunderness of matter, and consequently not yet posited as material, is an ideal singularity, a center, and that is what he calls gravity, die Schwere. Why does he say that, what do you think about that? Why does he say ideal singularity?
I think it's nominal. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Yeah.
It's not real. It's not real.
It's not real yet. No, it is ideal.
It's a normal point of central.
Yeah. So he's not talking about the center of gravity of the object. The object has a center of gravity, which, depending on the shape of the object, is either within or outside the circumference of its geometrical shape. But he's not talking about that. He's talking about
some external point which holds matter together in virtue, otherwise being this inconsistent interplay of two.
Yeah, otherwise it would be torn completely asunder. But that is what I claim is actually spirit. But then he calls it heaviness. So it's translated as gravity, but it is schwere. And that's the fact that things are heavy. That's what he talks about here.
Is that like Shelley, the third term, which is neutralize these two forces, and the third term which holds them together?
Yes.
In Shelley.
Yeah, it's a similar sort of thing, but to extent it's identical. It's a bit 2622, section 2. It is essential to distinguish gravity from mere attraction. So we might say, on a Newtonian understanding, gravity is just the attraction of one mass on another. The latter, attraction, is only the sublating of discreteness and yields no continuity. What would happen if you let attraction do its work? Then the two material objects would collide, but would not become continuous. The endpoint of attraction is contiguity, not continuity, as it were. Gravity, on the other hand, is the reduction of both discrete and continuous particularity to unity as a negative relation to self, to singularity, to a subjectivity, which, however, is still quite abstract. So, gravity is you might say it in this way, gravity is a vector. Gravity starts from the body, the corporeal, the material substance, and reaches out to a place where it, as he then later will say, wants to go. And that is, in a way, because of attraction as a vector, that seems to be kind of a different sort of thing. And it is the sublation of discreteness and continuity. Because here I am already longing to be there. And so there is a discreteness and continuity that are taken up in a higher unity, and that is the unity of subjectivity. That is the subject. That's what he seems to be saying. So you have to understand the subject in that way, but it is still a little bit abstract. But it's different from the mere attraction of one body to another. Now, how you can understand that in such a way that it isn't just the infusion of spirit into the material world, I don't know. Why you want to call it gravity, except in creating a link to an Aristotelian concept of gravity as a desire to be at one's natural place. He seems to be sort of infusing that idea into the discussion of gravity here. And later on he also has a discussion of Newton, of a section in the principles of mathematical principles of nature, where Newton says if you had a lead ball and you circle it around and you let go of it, then it's only gravity that keeps it from, if you threw it hard enough, it would, slung it hard enough, it would, fast enough, it would just disappear. but gravity seems to oppose gravity to that idea. Now, in the sphere of the first immediacy of nature, this self-external continuity is still posited as the existent. It is first in the sphere of physics that material reflection into self begins. Consequently, singularity, although present as a determination of the idea, is here outside the material element. In the first place, therefore, matter itself is essentially heavy. This is not an external property, nor can it be separated from matter. Gravity constitutes, heaviness it says in German, constitutes the substantiality of matter. This itself is the nisus, the striving to reach the center. But, and this is the other essential determination of matter, this center falls outside it. It can be said that matter is attracted by the center, i.e. its existence as a self-external continuum is negated, but if the center itself is conceived as material, then the attraction is merely reciprocal, is at the same time being attracted, two bodies attract each other, so that the center again exists in distinction from them both. The center, however, is not to be taken as material. The center, however, is not to be taken as material, for the characteristic of a material object is precisely to posit its center outside of itself. And that's what we saw right in the beginning, yeah? It has no unity. It is not the center, but the striving to reach it, which is immanent in matter. Gravity is, so to speak, the confession of the nullity of the self-externality of matter in its being for itself, or its lack of self-subsistence, of its contradiction. It can also be said that gravity is the being within self of matter in this sense, that just because it is not yet in its own self a center of subjectivity, it is still indeterminate, undeveloped, and undisclosed. The form is not yet material. Okay, stopping here. The form is not yet material. That's why I said earlier, this view seems to say that the striving of matter is to become form, and that is totality. I do think the word totality comes up. I will talk about that totality in a while. First understand this. So why say that the center of the material, the center to which the material thing strives, is not itself material? Has to be, because this is the unity that is external to the material thing. So turning it around, reflecting it back into itself, and saying what a material object is precisely that which posits its center outside of itself. Yeah?
Because if you take it as a material, then it has to posit its center somewhere else.
Exactly, yeah. And then we're back to Lucas' poems. Yeah? And that's the point all the time. The material is the other thought, and therefore also the material is that which posits thought as its center. It is not the center, but striving to reach it, which is immanent in matter. So the center is not in matter, but what's immanent in matter is the striving to reach the center. And then he says gravity is like it's Bekenntnis, der Nichtigkeit. So the fact that things are heavy is a confession of their nullity. Now, how can we make that word heaviness, schwer, how can we make that understandable? Why is there this word, schwer? Does it ring any bells? Can we connect it to anything else? as I already mentioned, the Aristotelian idea that why is the stone heavy? Because it wants to go down to the Schwere is for Aristotle, Schwere is hampered movement or hindered movement. Or Schwere is a measure of desire. The heavier something is, the more it wants to go to its natural place. And then he later on he says, in the Zusatz, there comes out very, very clearly. Matter is spatial separation. The one repels itself only from itself.
Separation is weak term, isn't it? Which suggests more spatial differentiation or distanciation.
Yeah. Die Einheit der Schwere ist nur ein Sollen. The unity of gravity is only an ought, eine Sehnsucht, das unglückseligste Streben, zu dem die Materie ewig verdammt ist. Denn die Einheit kommt nicht zu sich selbst, sie erreicht sich nicht. Wenn die Materie das erreichte, was sie in der Schwere sucht, so schwitzte sie in einem Punkt zusammen. The unity of gravity is only an ought, a longing. The most unhappy pieces to which matter is eternally condemned. For this unity does not come to itself or reach itself. If matter attained what it seeks in gravity, it would melt into a single point. It's quite heady stuff, eh? It's like a black hole.
But it's bad infinitives then. So
Yeah.
the innocence of
No, matter is bad because matter can never reach it. Yeah, it can never happen in matter. But the longing is so he seems to say gravity is not just attraction following out of. It's not just the notions that helps us to describe the movement of matter in space. As Newton himself says that he works with gravity as a constant or as a factor in his equations, but he does not have to assume that it is a force that works at a distance. So Newton is very clear about the fact that for him gravity is, as far as I understand these things, that gravity is a problematic, it's a metaphysical concept that he uses to the point for Newton is to get a correct description of movements of bodies in space, and he needs the gravitational constant for it. But he says, I don't have a hypothesis one thing, or I don't make hypotheses about whether there is actually such a force, or whether the notion of force actually has to come into the description of into the ontological analysis of the material world of space and time. But he seems to say, no. The gravity is the point where matter realizes that it is incomplete, and that realization is a striving for that completeness which it can never reach, because that realization could not exist in matter in any other way than as a striving for it. cannot be conceptual realization because that is not material. So it can only exist as an impossible striving of plurality to become one. And that's why he says if it would be successful in this, matter would melt into a single point, in other words, would dissolve itself, would disappear. And why is that impossible? Because matter is essentially repulsion. It wouldn't be matter if it was. So matter is impossibility, complete impossibility. It's complete paradox.
Well, I mean, it's just bizarrely Newtonian too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Newtonian forces of attraction and repulsion have to be maintained somehow. That is the Newtonian universe.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's.
Well, yeah. In what sense is that the case also for Newton?
Oh, it's just, the fact that forces, matter subsists insofar as they attract and repel one another. I mean, that's also the Newtonian universe.
Also repulsion.
Yeah. You can't have attraction without repulsion. You can't have repulsion without attraction. I mean, it's not necessarily not Newtonian in and of itself.
Yeah.
The gravity point is obviously not. Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking, okay, so in Newtonian Kant, right? Kant's version of this Newtonianism is also the fact of existence relies on the unsocial sociability of matter, more or less, right? It's the attraction and repulsion that must be maintained in this negative unity thing. I mean, it's, so it's, I don't know if that in and of itself is like anything but Newtonian.
Yeah,
also,
I think that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, I just don't know enough about Newton, but I thought that I thought that for Newton it is just the case that action is reaction.
Yeah, so attraction and repulsion.
But that's not the same as attraction and repulsion. You could have a Newtonian universe that was just one big lump of matter. It is only because there is movement that there are balances so that, for example, the moon doesn't fall into the
right. Yeah.
The moon doesn't fall onto the surface of the Earth because of its speed. But there's no reason why in absence of its speed it wouldn't just fall into the Earth and everything might.
Okay. This is really.
But that's really
question. But is the Newtonian universe finite or infinite? Wouldn't it be finite?
No, but Newton doesn't work with things like entropy or something.
Yeah, but you need, think that the fact that things stay the way they are and are able to move is because of the reciprocity of attraction and repulsion. So attraction and repulsion are, I thought that were the same thing. Insofar as the one needs the other, otherwise you do implode into the center of gravity, so to speak. But I don't know what the gravity.
Okay, well, I think that you're probably right. It hadn't crossed my mind to think about that, and I just had assumed, but that's out of complete ignorance of Newton, that any mass exerts an attraction on any other mass. And that's the gravitational constant, or that's all. But probably that's a sin.
Right, but then without repulsion, also, then everything would simply be gravity. Everything would be a black hole, right? So basically, you need to have existence. Basically, you need both, right?
For Newton, you only need speed, because the moment. So you only get two bodies that would, no matter how small they were, if they wouldn't stop by anything, then they would implode. They would become contiguous. But because one moves at a different speed to the other one, you get a circular motion.
How can you have attraction without repulsion?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're probably right.
If you had one or the other, then you would have nothing, because you'd either have everything repelled infinitely,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
nothing, or everything would implode. The primary claim was you need both forces, both as a kind of duality, just to get that kind of sort of Schengen insistence on polarity. And I don't know enough about, or maybe it's all about, probably about Newton, but presumably the starting point for this whole discussion is explicitly Kant's account of matter.
Yeah.
Hegel makes that clear here, as does Schelling in his similar accounts of this. And Kant doesn't have it that matter exerts forces of attraction and repulsion. He has it that matter is attraction and repulsion. It's constructed out of those two forces. So that's the starting point for what Hegel is saying,
Of course.
what Schelling is saying. And the argument which Hegel is making here in a way which I don't altogether understand, even in Hegel's own account of it, or even in its original version, is an argument which he's taken from Schelling about the impossibility of showing how matter is constructed out of attraction and repulsion, and the need for, as he was indicating earlier, a third principle to establish the identity of
Attraction.
things, matter, things as composed out of those alternating forces, because otherwise you would just get one or the other, or there'd be nothing to stabilize the interplay of the two forces. So gravity, following Schelling, is not attraction, because on the basis of merely two terms alone you can't construct matter, but gravity is the third principle, which has to be introduced as the principle of identity. So it's that which instantiates in the universe the original point of indifference or identity of the universe, and which then generates things in their specificity. So in the 1803 supplement to the Ideas of Philosophy of Nature, he comments on his own early inadequate account of matter being too Kantian, just taking Kant's account of matter as constructed by attraction and repulsion. And that was to collapse gravity into attraction, and whereas gravity is now fixed, a third principle, that which generates, well, it's that principle of identity which holds things in their individuality throughout the universe as a whole. How that works as gravity, I don't know.
That is the birth of spirit. That's what it says. That's subjectivity, and it's a little bit undeveloped, but that's what it is. It is the imposition of a separate sphere of ideality onto the material, and it's the ideality that keeps, typical for a concept, that keeps attraction and repulsion distinct and together. So that's how I see it, and that is why matter is form wanting to become totality. That's that gravity. So he introduces gravity as a principle of subjectivity almost into nature.
Well, it's the most minimal proto-form of subjectivity as singularity.
Yeah, but it is a form of subjectivity. And it is a subjectivity that for matter lies outside, sees itself outside of itself. So it is still a very Platonian view of matter that comes through here, and that was the other thing I wanted to say with respect to Newton. Yes, there is the Newton, I don't know how it works in Newton, but there is that, but the Kantian idea of attraction and repulsion, of being an inherent manifold, which is a contradictory concept, that notion of matter as the inherent, intrinsic, pure manifold, as it were, that is a Platonian notion of matter, and therefore stands in an idealist legacy. And that's the reine Mannigfaltigkeit by in Kant has got to do with that. And that's where it seems that it comes from. Perhaps. But, okay, back to, do you agree that what Schelling says there, that's a notion of ideality or not?
Depends on how one takes ideality, I guess.
When he refers, in the bit I mentioned earlier, for paragraph 262, about the centre being an ideal singularity, that's ideal, I-D-E-L-L-E, that's ideal as, which I system maintained to be nominal, has some point other than itself, which is oriented, but it's not as a way of kind of...
It's almost virtual.
But then in the first paragraph of the remark to that paragraph, Hegel does talk about the penultimate sentence of 262, remark paragraph 1. Besides only heavy matter is that totality in real existence in which attraction and repulsion can occur. It possesses the ideal moments of the notion or singularity or subjectivity. So, insofar as we take heavy matter, gravitational matter, to instantiate protoform of subjectivity, it does so in two respects. Firstly, in as much as it does constitute something with being for self, having some integrity as a particular thing, but also because it's oriented towards the other. It's the ideal singularity towards which it strives.
Yeah. Gravity is a mode of the inwardness of matter, and not its lifeless externality. Nevertheless, this inwardness does not yet have its place here. Matter is still that which is without inwardness, is the notion of the notionless. So it comes for him, it comes with, and that's what this is the transition to discussion of mechanics, it comes with light. With light, and that's a, I think it's very sharing, it's with light that this inwardness of matter arises. Gravity is not the inwardness matter, not its lifeless externality. So matter has an inwardness, and that is what Schwer is about. Yeah. But you see, okay, we have to bring this to a close now. We'll discuss Schelling next time, and then we go to Feuerbach and people like that. So we'll have one extra session here. But you see how Hegel is working with many different traditions. I think there is the Platinian notion of matter as otherness. There's also a discussion with a more scientific view of matter, but all the while he's trying to give this a place within and coming from the idea of the logic of being. That's how he gives it a place, and he shows in ways that he can develop in many directions that this logic of being leads to the positing of something that is essentially a realm of being outside of itself, but that as such has got a certain inwardness which points beyond itself to something else. And that paradoxical movement or moment seems to be part of the logic of logic as ontology itself. And points to ruptures that are necessary in order to think continuity or unity. And that is a very strong aspect that we see coming back in the more full-blooded materialisms from Hegel and Marx onwards. And that's also very important for Bloch, this idea that the dialectic is is interruption. The dialectic movement is rupture, it's interruption, it's not continuity, it's not sublation into unity via contiguous steps, it is interruption. Puls der Lebendigkeit, the pulse of liveliness is what Hegel calls a dialectic. And this pulse is a matter of discrete moments. But to think discreteness is part of a logic of the true and the whole, that sets Hegel off into the direction of thinking about the material or matter. And then he comes up with gravity as this inwardness of matter and not its lifeless externality, which would be attraction. Okay, think about what you will. So we do shedding next time, and then we quickly leave these high altitudes of speculation behind and we focus on concrete things.